Welcome back to Following Know It on a Stormlight podcast. This week is episode 91, and we are recapping the entirety of Oathbringer by Brandon Sanderson. It's been a couple weeks removed, actually, for us since we've done an Oathbringer reading for Eliot and Paul when we're recording this. So we'll be recapping the whole book and going through it of our highlights and our nitpicks and our lowlights. And then we'll be rating it to start the episode and then kind of going through it from there. But to start, Eliot, how are you?
I'm good. It feels good to get to this moment. I feel like I've hiked a 14er and I've reached the summit, and now we're just gonna have a jolly stroll back down to the bottom. It was an effort to get through this one. This one made you work for it, this book, but the payoff was unparalleled.
Do you realize that most people don't know what 14er means?
A 14er, for anyone who doesn't live in Colorado,
14 miles.
It is a mountain of 14,000 feet elevation and greater. And yes, I know there's 14ers outside of Colorado too.
It's just a very Colorado term. Anyway, Paul, how are you?
I appreciate the elaboration. I was trying to figure it out. I was like, a 14-mile hike would be really long. Like, yeah, that so it makes sense. Okay. I feel great. I'm excited to talk about it. I feel like I'm going to be playing the bad guy or being really mean to our book. I would like to preface this video with, I loved this book. It was great. I had a couple complaints which I think are valid, and other than that, I think I'm just going to kind of pick fun at it. But this has been great. It's been a fun book. It's crazy to think that this was my initial end goal when we set out on this. When we set out on this podcast, my goal was to finish Oathbringer, and then my life will be changed. So,
and here we are.
There we go.
Who's on our mug?
Our mug this week, we have an ardent. I knew it off the top of my head. I did not look. We have an ardent this week on our mug, and that is Jonathan, if you can see. So thank you a lot to Jonathan, our ardent, who is on the mug this week. This mug says First Gent. The story behind that is actually my girlfriend made this for me. She's a president of a local organization, and so our joke is that I'm a first gentleman, which is really fun. And so she made me a mug to celebrate. So I was also looking for new mugs, so it came at a great time. So Jonathan, congrats. You are actually a first gentleman now. So congrats on the love. So thanks a lot for your support.
Thank you.
Thank you for your support, Jonathan. I'm not going to ask for 2 words to summarize the whole book, so I will cut to the intro and we'll start talking.
I have 2 words. Oath and bringer.
It's 1 word.
No idea where you're going with those.
Well, I made it 2 words. We've made 2 words into 1 word before. We can do it the other way.
Okay. I think I will have Eliot start with your ratings. So go through. We've done this before on previous videos, but just real quick. We're going to be rating the plot, the characters, the world building, the theme, and the point of view of the whole book. And give a quick 15-second couple sentences of why you chose that rating, and then we'll go through it more in depth once we've all given our ratings of the book. So go ahead, Eliot.
Okay. Butt in if you guys have anything to say as I'm talking, but here we go. Alrighty. So for plot, I gave Oathbringer a 9 out of 10 for plot. The story was fantastic. The story was amazing. Top 5 books I think I've ever read, ever.
Wow.
However, I had to drop it 1 point just because I think the plot at a few points felt a little bit disjointed, particularly in like the first half, maybe like the middle third. Sort of, it was kind of tough to maybe wrap my head around where this was going. There was just so much kind of unknown and in front of us, which is totally a plot device that's totally intentional, I'm sure, from Sanderson, but it just felt a little bit not quite as smooth or fluid as, say, like Way of Kings. Way of Kings was a little more like focused, I guess, as a plot than Oathbringer was. So I just docked at 1 point for that. Characters, I did 9 out of 10 again for characters. There's one character in particular whose development was incredible, and of course that's Dalinar. I loved Dalinar's journey in this book. I actually took a point off here because of Kaladin.
Okay.
I think that Kaladin, and maybe we're biased because we started with him, right? Way of Kings, we were right in Kaladin's shoes kind of the whole time. I felt like he kind of his story got dropped a little bit in this book. Yep. I think not only did he get overshadowed by Dalinar, I would fully expect that. If this is Dalinar's book, Dalinar should overshadow Kaladin. But it felt like more than that. It felt like, I'm not sure what Kaladin learned in this book. I'm not sure quite how he developed. And so Dalinar was amazing. The rest of our characters were great. There were some amazing Shallan moments in here. We had some fantastic Renarin moments in here. But Kaladin, that track left me wanting a little bit. So 9 out of 10. You could maybe talk me into like a 9.5 if we were doing halves. Next, we've got world building. This one I'm willing to bet this is probably a gimme on any Sanderson book for me. 10 out of 10. His world building is pretty unmatched out there. Incredible detail, always more to dig into. So much that I know I've missed, which is like a point in his favor. I know there's like nuggets of goodness that I'm just itching to go and like start my reread of the whole series now so that I can go find all those little bits of lore that are tucked in there. So incredible detail, fantastically delivered. I feel like we learned a ton. I think I learned more than I gained questions in this book, which is a first. Yeah.
That's a bold claim.
we'll get to all the questions we do have left later, but I answered a lot. I feel like I'm starting to feel comfortable in this world and understand a bit about what the Cosmere is and what at least Roshar is. So world building amazing. Theme 10 out of 10. And my answer on this was very undecided until like the last 50 pages of this book.
Yep.
I did not know where this was going. We talked about this, right, throughout the whole book. Where is this going? We talked about how terrified I was of how this journey could go. And the way it wrapped up was beyond my expectations. I'm going to talk more later when we talk about like maybe some of our big parts of the book or our take on Dalinar's journey. But I'll just say for now, theme, easy 10 out of 10 for me. Last one, point of view. I went ahead and did an 8 out of 10 on this one. And there's 2 reasons, kind of one docking for each one. Nope, 3 reasons. 3 reasons for 8 out of 10. First one, a little bit, I wrap a few different things kind of up in this category. I don't know if that's cheating or not, Trevor, but the pacing of the book was a little bit rough for me at times. The Sanderlanche at the end of this book is crazy in a good ways and in bad ways at the same time. Like, it's super exciting, it's super adrenaline filled. The actual events that are happening are awesome, but it is just a breakneck, hectic pace. Like, I've read it, I've studied it twice now, and I still feel like I'm, drowning, trying to drink from a fire hose each time. It's almost too much. It's almost too awesome.
Yeah.
Brandon, your book is too awesome. The other thing I'll mention is descriptions. And I've docked points from Brandon on the last 2 books for this same reason. There's one part about Brandon Sanderson's writing that bugs me just a little bit. And I'll caveat this with a similar caveat as from you at the beginning, Paul. I love these books and I love his writing. It's amazing. It's engaging. It keeps you hooked and you really want to read more. But there's one little part of it that is not quite to my taste. And I'm going to go off on a little, I know I've been talking for a little while here monologuing, but I've got a tangent if you guys are willing to let me do it.
Yeah, go for it.
Please do. I want to hear it.
Okay, buckle up for a little bit of a tangent here. So I've talked before in our previous 2 books and in our ending episodes that I wish Sanderson would describe the book, the setting, like the events, a little more. Sanderson is very kind of in the moment. You're in the character's shoes. You're hearing their thoughts, but there's not actually that much description of like the world around you. I wish sometimes there would be a little more of that. Tell me what the characters are hearing as they're walking down the streets of Urithiru, as they're in the board meeting with the coalition. Like what are all the characters wearing? What does it look like? What is the ambiance in the room? My brain like wants the story to pause and get more of that, and sometimes you just don't. But I found out by doing a little bit of research, this is entirely intentional by Mr. Sanderson. He writes this way on purpose. And a shout out to one of our listeners out there, Ranks, in our Discord. He helped me dig up a video. Brandon Sanderson posts quite a few of his college lectures. He teaches at BYU, right?
Yep.
Out in Utah. And he teaches writing classes, and he posts quite a few of his lectures on YouTube. They're super cool. I've only watched a few because I know that he's rather infamous for random spoilers. So I usually try and stay away from his YouTube channel as much as I can for now. But I was watching a few, and he talks about how he writes the prose of his story very intentionally this way. And the metaphor he uses is that of a window pane. He's intentionally trying to write in such a way that you don't stop and notice the words he's using. All you see is the world you're in. It's a fully immersion-based technique of he doesn't want to spend time on those descriptions. He just wants to suck you right in. And then he also talks about how he wants to describe the world using his verbs and not his adjectives and his adverbs. He wants to show you the world and not tell you about the world. And if you think about that for a second, it makes total sense. Like you can see that's his style, is you're in the moment, things are happening, you're doing it with the characters, you're not taking a moment to kind of pause and look around and see the world around you. So it's a very engaging thing. It's not quite 100% my taste. I wish I knew more about the world around him, but I've learned recently that this is 100% intentional by Sanderson. He writes this way on purpose.
Good stuff. I'm going to go next because I think we can spend more time on yours, Paul, because mine's not going to be very controversial. So, plot, I have 9 out of 10. I think one of the main criticisms, and it's a valid criticism, of Oathbringer is it's slow. It's deliberately slow. You could probably cut out a full 200 pages and still maintain the essence of the story fairly well. Namely Shadesmar. Shadesmar has an interesting side quest that starts in part 4, and you're like, what is happening here? So the plot is really, really good. It's intentionally slow. I really enjoy it because it's intentionally slow, but I don't know. 9 out of 10. Characters, world building, theme, all 10 out of 10 for me. Characters, phenomenal as always. World building, maybe the best fantasy world building author I've ever read. Theme, this is my favorite Stormlight book. I've said that for however long now, and it's because of how Dalinar closes this book and what this book actually means, and what he's trying to tell the reader. This story, the story itself, is amazing. Point of view, I also gave it an 8 out of 10 for a total of 47 out of 50. Point of view, there's a few things lacking, as Elliot just touched on, so I won't go into too much detail on it, but I'm a big fan of Sanderson's prose and his describing his world in verbs as opposed to adjectives and adverbs. I really like that, and I'm a big fan of that, but I also agree that it's not Brian Jakes is the one that comes to mind, where he'll spend 2 full pages telling you about the soup that all the mice ate in Redwall. that's just who he is, and it's kind of fun, but there's pros and cons to both. So 47 out of 50.
All right, that leaves me. I'll just go right to it. For plot, I had slightly lower than Trevor and Elliot. I did go with halves, by the way, Elliot. I have 8.5 for the plot.
We'll
My
allow it.
main complaints were honestly the plot of Shadesmar. I was extremely excited for, but I overall, like with how it ended, I didn't really like it because it felt like they just got into a problem. It felt like our characters got into a problem which they couldn't fix, and then were kind of like luckily snapped back by Dalinar. It was just kind of it added a great amount of suspense, and as a reader, it was very engaging, like incredibly engaging, because I had no idea how they were going to get out of that. But with the way it ended, which was my favorite scene, by the way, like Dalinar pulling all the realms together and everything was incredible. But I did not like that as the story. Like I didn't know what the point of the Shadesmar story was with that. So that was my biggest dock of the plot line. That, and it is pretty slow. It's like overall, but I thought it was good and important. I think where I would dock it a little bit more is leading up to our climax. It did kind of feel like Brandon was playing with me a little bit and like stopping and like adding suspense, and we were at like maximum suspense, but then he would come back and still not give the payoff yet, and you'd have to wait like another time around, of perspectives. That I honestly felt was a bit unnecessary, I guess. Like sometimes. So 8.5 out of 10 for plot. For characters, I went same as Trevor. I think the characters are a 10 out of 10. I think the range of characters and specifically how they interact with each other is incredible. I think it's very consistent, and it's like I really know them as a person because I can understand whenever they meet someone new how that interaction is going to go, which I think is incredible. And that was my highest rating. World building, I gave him a 9 out of 10. Okay. And my reasoning, I feel like I'm in trouble. My reasoning for this is
Explain yourself.
Hold on. Okay, 9 out of 10. My reasoning is honestly, I don't know if it was a length thing, but there were times where I felt myself getting unengaged with the world as I was reading it. And I think I will say, one thing to preface is a lot of the things that Brandon Sanderson describes and depicts in this book are very big and abstract things that are hard to imagine, right? Like Shadesmar and all the stuff with like odium and everything is incredible, but it's hard to depict. And in some instances like that, I would like a little more of what Elliot was saying with like describing the scenery. But in general, I like the way he does it. I really like the way he shows and doesn't tell, I guess.
Can I chime in there for real quick?
Yes.
One of the examples of this that I've actually been frustrated with in the past is a Thunderclast. I feel like when I finished Oathbringer, I still didn't know what a Thunderclast looked like, and I had read and I've seen it like 4 times now. But that's kind of it's kind of intentional because none of the characters are stopping and looking at the Thunderclast and going to think about it to themselves. They're giving a 2-word description and then they're going to fight it, or they're running away, or whatever. And so verbs as opposed to adjectives.
That's fair. Given the context of knowing how he tries to do it, that makes sense. As a reader, I was a little confused and honestly a little disappointed because we remember Thunderclasts from the Prelude.
Yeah.
And so I was kind of hoping for that to be a bigger deal, I guess, or at least see a little more. So, anyways, 9 out of 10 for world building. I'm giving it a 9 out of 10, and it's like a controversial thing, so
Right.
that's kind of funny. Theme. This is where I went even further. I have 8.5 out of 10 for theme. And honestly, my reasoning for this, I think the ending of the book was incredible. I think a lot of the storylines were great and the messages were great. But I was a little let down by the words. So Dalinar comes to his conclusion, and kind of like the most important words a man can say is, I will do better. And that's a great message, but just me, I was a little let down. I thought that seemed very vague and broad, and it was inspirational and moving to an extent, but I didn't. My earth was definitely not shattered. And so kind of the theme of that, I wasn't super impressed, and so I gave it an 8 out of 10, 8.5 out of 10. So there we have it. Point of view, I actually went up a little bit. I gave it a 9. I do understand the franticness, especially at the end. It feels very jumpy around and more hard to follow. But I love the method of storytelling of the alternating perspectives and kind of seeing our different parts. And I love how it feels like everyone is crossing the finish line kind of at the same time in our books. It's like a whole bunch of different avenues and parts, and they all kind of finish the race together, which is, I think, is really cool. And I personally love that mode of storytelling. So overall, it's still a 45 out of 50. That's 4.5 stars. I loved the book. It was great.
I do think it's funny that one of your major critiques is you'll have a scene and then Brandon Sanderson will tear you away from it. And he does that a couple times. And then one of your strengths at the end there was, I like everybody crossing at the same time. Like, you can't have... you see what I'm saying?
I see what you're saying. And I'll say that I think a lot of those times where we were jumping was unnecessary. Like, I think he was adding too much, or trying to add too much suspense, and that we would go back and it wouldn't add much. I don't think like the times we're jumping back were adding anything. I didn't have a problem with the jump. Like, if it's a cliffhanger, that's great. Like, I'm fine with that. We'll come back. But it felt like we came back and didn't get anywhere.
It was still the same cliff that we came back to.
Mm-hmm. We were still just standing on the edge of the cliff, and then we come back, and like, yeah, that's pretty much it. Oh, maybe this will make it worse. But I remembered another point I actually had about why I lowered my score for the plot from y'all was compared to our other books. I don't think I liked Dalinar's flashback chapters as much as our previous books.
Okay.
So that was why. But I loved the climax of his, especially the Night Watcher. Maybe my favorite moment from flashbacks ever. That was incredible. But a lot of it before that just didn't feel... I wasn't as like surprised or invested in his flashbacks until like the very end. So that's my rating for 45 out of 50.
Sounds good. All right. Next section, just general impressions, general highlights that you had, and we can talk about it back and forth. I am a big fan of Bridge 4, and we finally get a decent amount of Bridge 4 point of view. That's actually part of the slow that you were talking about, Elliot, in that first middle third-ish. It's part 2, and we stop for 7 or 8 chapters and just have Bridge 4 hanging out in Urithiru. And that's part of the story. We're just getting, a Rock point of view chapter and a Sigil point of view chapter and a Moash point of view chapter. And some of those, I'd be willing to bet his editor said cut some of those and he refused. I'd be willing to put some money on that. But I'm a big fan of Bridge 4 point of view chapters and Bridge 4 just as a whole.
I did too. Enjoy those. I loved getting to get a perspective from like Scar, Rock, Lopin, like learn a little more about those characters was super valuable. But I think that played into, like, it took away from Kaladin. It took the spotlight away from Kaladin a little bit. So I want all those Bridge 4 perspectives, but I also want more Kaladin. But I also don't want to take away from Dalinar, so I don't know how you make it better, but I enjoyed those two.
I also I thought it was a great idea. I think I'm 50-50. I'm 50% in the boat of I want more Kaladin. I think we really got to see a lot from like all the Bridge 4 guys, pretty much, which was really cool, and I'm glad he like committed to that doing it, but I might have enjoyed more of like seeing from some of our more notable, like still having the like Rock Scar Sigil chapters, um but then leaving extra room. I also 100% believe, and I would also bet money with Trevor that an editor probably recommended to remove them, and he was very staunchly like, no, if we are removing these, we are not releasing this book. Like, just very, my mic fell. Just very like deliberate that it's important. So
I wonder though if by this book his editor knows him pretty well and he's like, "Hey man, I'm doing my job and I got to tell you to cut these, but you aren't going to do it, are you?" No? Yeah. Okay. Fine. They stay. All right. Moving on.
I could also definitely see that happening as well. I do want to revisit the Kaladin storyline. Feels like it's been dropped, because I would agree with you that, in book 1, obviously it's Kaladin's whole story. That's the entire book. Book 2, he still has plenty of page time. He's got his story B that happens with Elokar and Moash, and he realizes at the end there that this isn't right, and I'm gonna do what's right, even if I'm gonna die to do it. Book 3, he literally can't say the 4th ideal because he hasn't learned it yet. I mean, he knows the words, but he hasn't had the character development to say them yet. Is the argument there? So, but by that argument, his entire plotline has been dropped, and he hasn't learned anything.
I actually am gonna pull back a little bit, or okay. I'm trying to organize my early book thoughts, because honestly, I don't remember the early parts of the book near as well.
Right.
But he has really good, I would say, development up to the point where Elokar dies. Right, we get to see him as he's really having a struggle or internal battle about our Parshmen finding humans, right? And I thought that was genius. I loved every moment of that, and that also, I'm honestly was remembering this as we were talking about it. When he gets like captured in quotes by the Parshendi and goes with them and learns a lot about them, and we really see his heart soften for them. I think that was great. Maybe it just goes into my little Shadesmar bucket that I'm not thrilled about. In that I think it was great growth for Kaladin up until that part, and then after that he was sent on a quest, but the quest didn't really work out, and they're kind of bailed out. And I think that could have. But the thing is, I don't know what you do there. But maybe if they had some big, I don't know. I figured that could have been done differently, so that Kaladin could have had more growth or a different avenue of character development or something like that. But I do think in the beginning of the book, through that part with Elokar, there we see some good Kaladin development.
And it's not like Kaladin is necessarily hurting for good moments. I mean, we have the epic showdown with Kaladin and Amaram at the end of the book. That's awesome. But I'm with you, Paul. I just feel like there might be a few kind of bricks missing in the path for Kaladin here, because he reaches this moment where he's struggling with this 4th ideal. He knows what it is, but he can't bring himself to say it. And I'm just not quite I'm not quite with him there. I'm not quite understanding what the struggle is that he's having. I forgot kind of about the early like Parshendi and Parshman struggles that Kaladin had. You're absolutely right. That was a good little struggle, but then it feels like we're almost just missing like a small little chunk. How did we get from that to he can't say the fourth ideal to he shows down against Amaram? So still lots of cool stuff. But almost.
This is a really funny conversation from my perspective. I just want to say that. But what I will say is it's deliberate. That it's this Kaladin feels like his story's been dropped is deliberate, and that's because of his depression. His depression has stalled him emotionally in Shadesmar, and you see it right at the beginning of part 4. He's literally a husk of himself, and Syl is super concerned about it because, and there's a couple conversations that they have like, are you okay, Kaladin? He's like, yeah, I'm fine, blah, blah, blah. And his character arc stalls and it feels like everybody else is moving and he's not. That's a very relatable feeling for someone who has depression, where they feel like everybody else is moving on with their lives and then I'm stuck at the train station. Everybody else is gone. So I'll just say this will be revisited later.
I'll also totally give the story the benefit of the doubt of, as a first time reader, I'm so distracted by everything else. I'm so just like trying to figure out Dalinar. I'm trying to figure out the many personalities of Shallan. When Kaladin comes around, it's like, sorry, I got way more confusing things to think about Kaladin. Sorry, I'm gonna flip some pages here. Like, not literally, but that's kind of the thing, the thoughts.
If Kaladin's worried about being left behind, I wonder how Adolin might feel. Or I like what you like that point, Trevor. I'm glad you brought that up because I hadn't thought of that. But I don't know if that's I didn't notice it, or like in my head I don't remember anything that could point to that as being like a thing. Maybe like hearing from Brandon Sanderson and hearing the like inside insight of what he's trying to do with that, and I'm excited. I have full faith actually that will like pay off and come to fruition, like
right.
have a purpose.
Right.
But right now, finishing this book, it doesn't quite add up for me. So
yeah, I totally get that.
Looking at it in the context of Oathbringer, I didn't pick that up, I guess. So
okay, you can't talk about Kaladin at length without talking about Moash. Let's talk about Moash. Okay, so Moash kills Elokar. In Moash's mind, his story arc is done. He has no point in his life anymore. By the end of the book, he is just a tool of the fused. He doesn't care. He has dropped all moral compass, if you will. He knows who Yezreen is, and he kills them because he's been told to, and he has let go of all passion, let go of all feeling. And there's a passion conversation that we could have of Leshwi sees passion in Moash before Elokar dies. After Elokar dies, we get a couple Moash chapters of I don't feel anything. I am using this pickaxe on this rock for weeks, and I don't care because I don't have anything else to do with my life. I'm just going to hit rocks with a pickaxe. And Leshwi comes to him and says, you can have the honor blade, and with it will return passion. But you have to kill Moash. Do you guys remember that part? And he gets a new name at the end of the book.
Who are they giving the honor blade to?
So the honor blade that they stole from Bridge 4, they give to Moash at the very last scene of the book. Like the last chapter right before the wedding. They give it to Moash.
I think I was confused because I think you said at the end, but you have to kill Moash.
Right, no, that is what I said.
Oh.
Leshwi says you can take this honor blade, but if you take it, Moash dies. Moash
Okay,
will be no more.
I remember that now, and that makes total sense. I just heard that, and I was like, "Whoops! You meant to say Yezrian or
Right,
something
no.
or whatever." So, okay, my apologies.
So,
That makes more sense. Like leave Moash behind.
right, so
Okay.
Moash
Okay.
is no longer Moash. The only person who will be referring to Moash as that name is Kaladin. Moash will refer to himself as Vyre.
so a potential rebirth moment, although not necessarily in a positive light.
Yeah, most definitely not. Unfortunately, I I feel like each book we're getting a more despicable enemy for Kaladin to face down. So I'm looking forward to next we had the Zeth Kaladin Sky battle last book. Are we gonna get the Kaladin Moash Sky battle next book? That'd be pretty cool.
True.
I could do with another one of those battles. I liked that.
Jancy from our Patreon in our Discord server had a perfect comment in this in one of our channels, and I'm just going to read it. They said, "I love the progression of Moash killings, a fused in self-defense, a king in retaliation, a herald in cold blood. Each one is more significant, and each one is more sinister." Couldn't have said it better myself.
Yeah, that summed up nicely like my reactions to those without even thinking about it. Because the first one, you can kind of defend Moash, even with Elokar. You can at least understand what he's doing.
Right.
But then when he kills Yezrian, there's just something that kind of flips in my brain. It's like, okay, now you've crossed a line to just callous, not caring, being told what to do, killing people. Now you're just a force of destruction. You've flipped from relatable, maybe anti-hero to okay, now you're a villain, and now we need to take you down.
I agree. I also want to point out his killing of Elokar. I think that's like the most emotionally involved I've been with a killing or a death in our story so far. And it's not fully out of. Elokar was definitely developing, and I like him a lot more now than at the beginning of our story for sure. But I could understand Moash's point of view at the end of Words of Radiance, right?
Right.
Now, where he actually killed Elokar, I cannot find an ounce of concern for Moash because he is literally this is happening like while the fused are attacking a city. Like it is an end of the world kind of scenario, and he's seeking his personal vengeance, which really physically harms me. It reached out from the page and physically slapped me in the face. Well, the audiobook. I don't know how that works. It just happened.
You dropped your phone on your face in bed.
Something like that, yeah.
Do you guys like Moash as a character?
I don't want to say it, but yes.
Is he well written, I should say?
Yes, he in the. It's been a long time since I've seen these stories, but in the same way, if anyone watching has read or seen Game of Thrones, in the same way that like Ramsay is a good character, I think of Moash, and he's kind of written to be despicable, and he does a great job at making him despicable. Um, so he's well written.
I like that Moash is not two-dimensional. He's grown. He's changed as the books have gone on. We just talked about there's a progression to Moash, and I think that makes him a well-written character. Do I like him? No.
Right.
But I'm not supposed to like him. I did like him. We did like him originally. Then we try to defend him, and now we just can't defend him anymore. And it's to the point where we hate him. But that's a journey we were meant to go on, and we were guided along very masterfully. So I do love the character progression there. I did want to mention briefly, and this will tie into some of my other kind of big takeaways from the book. You can draw some interesting kind of contrasts between the decisions that Moash makes with the decisions that Amaram and Dalinar makes. And the culmination of that is the responsibility that Dalinar takes. That moment where he says, no, you cannot have my pain. I keep it on myself. I choose to deal with what I've done, even though there's a bit of an out there. There's a potentially legitimate excuse that Dalinar might have in the thrill, but he says, no, that was me. That is who I am. It has made me become the person I am today. Contrast that to Amaram, who just kind of takes the easy out. Amaram just says okay, Amaram, sure. Or not Amaram. I'm Amaram. Okay, Odium, you can have my pain. I don't have to deal with it. Make me awesome. And then there's Moash, who kind of like almost takes responsibility in the wrong way. He like says, oh, I'm a villain. I might as well just be a villain. So tell me who to go murder and I'll go murder them. Like that scale is I have to think about that kind of hard. It's a cool little comparison.
Amaram at the end finally realizes that what he did was wrong, but he chooses the easy out and says, I'm not going to deal with that mentally. You can have it. I'll do whatever you say. You can have my pain. I'm not going to deal with it. What were you guys'? I've kind of led it so far.
I'll mention I'll tie into that a little bit more. My takeaway from the whole book, like as a whole, was that concept of responsibility, which I thought was great. And we didn't even quite know where it was going until the last 50 pages of the 1,200 page book. You know, it was all this build up, and then that moment where Dalinar says all of that terrible stuff, all the stuff that we've had to now endure with him, all of those flashbacks where we were cringing as we watched Dalinar do some pretty terrible things. And then for him to stand up and say, I take responsibility for everything that I've done in my past. Like, we know what that means because we've seen so much of it. That was so cool. And then you can actually tie the responsibility part into Shallan as well. I actually think I'd be willing to bet that Shallan's progression in this book might be a little underrated. I bet there's a lot of Shallan fans out there actually who probably don't think that's underrated. They're all in on that. But like that scene with Hoyd and Shallan was amazing, where he tells her, like, you have worth. You are struggling with who you are. Know that you, Shallan, are worth protecting. Like that moment, that like sort of, you can take responsibility for who you are because you are worth it. Like, wow, that was so cool. So lots of really cool takeaways from this book, I thought.
I really love your word to conclude this book, Elliot. I think responsibility is I cannot think of a better word for sure. And I love the concept of responsibility, and so that's really great. I think my favorite moment of that was probably with Hoyd and Shallan, so I'm really glad you brought that up as well. I don't know if it was my favorite for the theme or because I really wanted someone to talk to Shallan about her scenario. And so
Good word.
I was really like, thank you a lot, Hoyd. Hoyd, if you're watching this, thank you so much. You know,
It's a nitpick, but Shallan stole Dalinar's therapy session. Dalinar could have used that same responsibility talk, right? And Eliot, you were really looking forward to this talk between Dalinar and Hoyd that you thought was coming, and it never happened.
I don't think so.
Maybe I need to go back and dock another point off the plot, because that's right. I forgot about that. We were supposed to get a scene, and usually we get multiple kind of Hoyd moments with some different characters, but what the moment I was waiting for that we didn't get was like that enlightenment moment that Hoyd like delivers. Like for Kaladin, it's the Wandersail, right? Where he tells him this story and it kind of opens Kaladin's eyes to what he could be. And then there's a brief flashback with Shallan in Words of Radiance, where she encounters Hoyd when she's younger. And he has this, I forget the details of exactly what he said, but he awakens in her some of that, oh, I could be more. I was waiting for that with Dalinar. Where is that moment where Hoyd causes Dalinar to see something he hasn't seen before? I might have missed it. It might be hidden in there. I'll be honest. There was so much that went on. Maybe there is a comparable moment we can find, but instead we got the really cool Shallan scene, which was awesome, but we didn't get a comparable Dalinar moment.
I'll spoil it for you and then say it's not there. It's deliberately not there. In the Wave Kings, we have the Wandersail. In Words of Radiance, we have two. We have Fleet, which is Hoyd showing up to Kaladin while he's in prison after he's defended Adolin, and he tells him of Fleet. And then the one you were referring to was Middlefest, where the messenger talks with Shallan and says, I know you can light weave. Embrace who you are. You don't have to hide this. And he light weaves with her. And then in this book, we get a Shallan and Hoyd therapy session and no Dalinar. So
I want to talk about this a second. So we didn't get this Dalinar moment, but I think I like that we didn't, at least right now, at least for the purposes of this book, because Dalinar still had his big revelation and big development, and he kind of came to it himself. He had a lot of talking with the Stormfather and a lot of, work that went into it, but he came out of his own volition and told Odium, you can't have my pain, that was me, and had his huge triumphant moment, and it was just him, which I think adds to that power. I think Hoyd was there, right? One thing we kind of know about Hoyd, I don't know the rules of it, but he's where he's supposed to be at whatever time, and he was there, and he's been able to help Kaladin and Shallan, who, from the stories we've seen, or from present day, not counting flashbacks, Dalinar is much more responsible and mature, I would say, than Kaladin and Shallan. And I feel like Hoyd has been kind of a mentoring figure in a kind of a funny but sometimes serious way. Whereas with Dalinar, it's less needed, or he's able to get to these big moments of growth on his own, which I think adds a lot with my respect to the character. And so I took it as deliberate, as showing how Dalinar did this without Hoyd popping up and being like, maybe that was maybe you should take responsibility for that, or, that kind of notion.
I think that does play into it a lot of Dalinar's age, that he has been through the journey himself already, and he can pull himself through that based on what he's already been through, not based off of, what Fleet did in some parable that Hoyd's going to tell me. Paul, do you have anything that you want to highlight?
I have two things that I would like to highlight. Well, okay, three. One is just Zeth is awesome. The two actual ones are, I wanted to bring that up a little bit. What you're saying, there was like the story of Fleet and stuff like that. In this book, something I'm just remembering is we get a lot of like intellectual and like moral or ethical discussions with Dalinar and Teravangian, which I think are really interesting,
Yes.
and also kind of supplement that notion. Um, I don't remember the tale exactly, but there's kind of the one about like a criminal or a burglar or murder or something. And it's like a hypothetical situation that Teravangian gives to Dalinar.
It's in the Way of
like,
Kings, and they're talking about it. Yeah,
Yes. Do you remember that well enough, Trevor? Can
I
you
do.
actually
Yeah.
like provide more context there?
So Dalinar is referring to the Way of Kings, and he's talking with Tiravangian. This is when he still trusts him, and he says there's a parable from Noadon, and it says there's one guy who commits a crime, and there's three candidates, and there's no way of figuring out who actually did it. There's all three of them say I didn't do it. All three of them have perfectly good alibis. What do you do? As a king, what do you do? And Teravangian go back and forth of, well, do you imprison all three of them to make sure the murderer is off the street? Or do you let them all go because you can't confirm who did it, and then you're punishing two innocents or whatever? And Teravangian comes to the conclusion of, oh, I just kill all three of them and make sure the world is better because there's no more murderer. And Dalinar says, well, I wouldn't do anything even if I had 1,000 murderers and one innocent guy. And that's the difference they come to, is if there's one innocent life lost, it's not worth it.
Yes, thank you so much for that context. I did not remember it in that accurate of detail. But my point of bringing that up is I think that was just an excellent display of one, Dalinar's character, and two, just honestly tackling some big questions, and stuff like that. And so I thought that was just really great, and something I wanted to touch on that we saw with Dalinar that I'd kind of forgotten about a little bit. My last point, or last overall thing that I want to appreciate with Oathbringer is how big of scale our problems are now. We went from the first book where we were trying to survive a bridge run, and now we're trying to make sure this god doesn't kill this other god, and like all this crazy stuff. We're worried about like divine beings and cosmic destruction, and trying like wrapping my head around it is super awesome and fun. And um, it's crazy to think that we got here from where we started, even though the page count adds up.
Sure.
But yeah, but it's super cool to see, and I'm really happy with the magnitude of our conundrums right now.
The way I picture it is you're zooming out. In the first book, you're looking at the Shattered Plains, and then in the second book, you're looking at the war between the Parshendi and the Alethi, and the Everstorm is the big climax. In the third book, you're looking at Roshar. You're looking at all of how everybody's going to come together. Are they going to work together? Who's on whose side? Blah, blah, blah. And then we're fighting over Thaylen City, which we've never been to before, but we still care because we care about who's there.
So next book, we will be looking at Roshar. It's just further away.
Right.
It's just smaller. Yeah. Okay. Perfect. But that's all that I. That concludes our general impressions of Oathbringer.
Do we even need to do this next section? Favorite characters.
I think we
Lightning
should.
round.
Kaladin.
Dalinar.
Oh wow, that was really fast. I wasn't prepared. Zeth.
Okay.
Honorable mentions to Renarin.
Shout out to Renarin.
Yeah, I love him. He's great.
Okay. Well, we've already done some of this, but I do want to revisit it within this context. The Dalinar discussion. That's what we have in the outline. And I want to frame it within this context of the first two books. Dalinar is up here, especially from the point of view of Kaladin. Well, the first book, he's kind of here. Is he the Light Eyes who everybody says he is? End of first book. Yep, turns out he is. He's up here, and he lives up to everything that everybody says about him. He's an awesome guy. So we've had Dalinar on this pedestal kind of, and he hasn't really moved. He's done a little bit of movement of like character development, but outwardly his character to everybody else has been up here. He's Mr. Codes, the Alethi Codes of War. That's him. Halfway through Oathbringer, well, about a third of the way through Oathbringer, he comes from here to like, woo, way down there, and you're like, oh, this guy's terrible, and then he builds him back up throughout the rest of the book. What are you guys' thoughts on that type of character construction? Is that, I thought that was brilliant. When I read Oathbringer for the first time, I was like, that is amazing. Like, that is so cool. I've never, maybe not never, I rarely come across a character where an author does that, where you'll have this such high expectations and they completely deconstruct the character from the base foundation of what you thought the character was, and then rebuilds it of, no, this person is still who you thought they were, even though they were here.
I thought it was a really... Go ahead, Paul.
Oh, okay. I'm gonna tackle this a little bit right quick. I think I think it was. I also really like this approach, where we have an excellent character, and then honestly, Brandon kind of does his best to try and tear him down. You know, with the flashback chapters. At least with the climax of them, I would say.
Mm-hmm.
Where, no big deal, he accidentally kills his wife, or he kills his wife, all this stuff. It's a big mess. I think my drawback to this is so the big moment is Dalinar's rediscovery of his past going to affect who he is now? We see him as the honorable, outstanding character, but is his past, which he's rediscovering, going to make him be like stray from that path? Is he going to reaccept that? And he doesn't, which is incredible. I think the only thing that annoyed me about it is when he finds out, at least from what I remember, we don't see him interact really at all. We know he is drinking himself away and trying to get a grip on himself, which, especially given his character and his history with alcohol and stuff, makes logical sense. But I personally would have liked to see him maybe try and step into a role, and it would have made more sense if he was trying to uphold and was faltering in how he was dealing and working with people. Where I feel like it was kind of the approach of, he's just very absent, not like touching that, I guess. So I felt like in my mind, he never really had a like negative downfall, because like current Dalinar was very honorable and good, and his rediscovery was the obstacle, and it felt like he was kind of absent for a while and just kind of came back refreshed, which worked well in the end. But to me, that didn't feel like as big of a struggle as I may have expected, I guess, which sounds weird to say, but overall, I'm being very mean, by the way. I am being as mean as I can to this story.
Mm-hmm.
So
I thought it was a really creative way to give a character like Dalinar a progression, something to learn. You see characters kind of like the Dalinar of Way of Kings and Words of Radiance a lot. They're the paragon of virtue. Their character's not supposed to go on a journey. They already are who they are. It's your younger, hero and heroines that are, learning from them. That's kind of what Dalinar was. He was that, that light from above. But then all of a sudden, here we get into a book where we're able to take that, on a pedestal type character, that wise figure, and say, oh no, this person has a journey to go on too. Here's how we're going to do that. Like that, it was a really creative way to explore that kind of character that doesn't get done very often, if ever. It's a twist kind of on the paradigm there.
That is a really good way of framing it that I honestly I don't know if I took fully into account. My mind jumps to the like Dumbledore, like Gandalf kind of characters who are the
Exactly.
like the notable, like noble, wise, fair like characters, and we don't see them struggle. They're just perfect and no harm can come to them kind of thing. And bring that up, that's really great. And I do really like, I really appreciate that they showed that struggle and then got to show him overcome that. But yeah, I honestly didn't think about how rare, like I don't know if I could think of another example of that kind of character development.
I'm glad you brought up what Dalinar stands for everybody else, the younger generation, the Shallan, Kaladin, Adolin age group. Everybody holds Dalinar to this pedestal, and then we just went on this full journey with Dalinar of reconstructing his character, but nobody else did. Dalinar went through that full thing privately. If Dalinar starts sharing some of this, is that going to affect their view of him? And like, oh yeah, by the way, I was a war criminal 20 years ago. Oops. Sorry. Hey, Renarin, I killed your mom. Sorry. You know, how
Do you think we'll have that conversation?
how does that go?
Yeah, I don't know how that goes. I don't know at all.
I bet it's going to go about how it went for us, right? We had that shocking moment of, wait, this is Dalinar? You telling me that Dalinar did this? Like, that's going to be the reaction of people when they hear it as well. We had to go on a 1,000-page journey to build back up our trust and our confidence in Dalinar. And I think where we're at now is even higher than we were before. We respect Dalinar even more than we did before. But if he breaks this to Adolin, to Renarin, if Kaladin learns about, the darkness in Dalinar's past, I think there's going to come doubt. And that's going to have to grow. That trust is going to have to regrow. That'd be my guess. Because that's kind of how we had to do it.
Any predictions on when and if those conversations are coming? Are they coming early Rhythm of War? Are they never coming? Is he just going to keep this journey to himself?
My guess would be it's like a part 2 of Rhythm of War kind of thing. Like, I don't think it's going to be near any of our like Sanderlanche territory at all.
Right.
And I don't think we're going to put it off a full book. But it seems kind of important, like if, to have that. Or, I mean, that could be a part of Dalinar's development. Just maybe he's too afraid to tell his kid, that's valid. If you're afraid to tell your kids you killed their mother, like that's very earth-shattering. And so that's right. But I could see it as like a big dramatic conversation earlier on in our book.
I'm gonna play this a little meta here. At the end of Words of Radiance, I predicted that the big event at the end of that book, Adolin killing Sadeas, was going to be crucial plot line, critical to Adolin's development. We were going to dwell on that. We were going to deal with that immediately in Oathbringer. We didn't even mention that like more than once for 3/4 of the way through this book. And then finally at the end, Adolin starts confessing that to some people. So I'm gonna flip flop here. I want to say that this is going to be something we have to deal with in the near term with Dalinar, but actually, I'm going to try and second guess Mr. Sanderson here and say I don't think we are going to revisit this. I think Dalinar is going to keep this to himself, and it'll probably come up later. It'll probably come up eventually, but I think this might not actually be that big of a deal going forward.
I could see that. I don't know why why Adolin or Renarin would ask Dalinar, because it's
Right.
kind of been water under the bridge in
Right.
their family for years, right?
And
So-
maybe Dalinar feels like he's fought that demon. He's beaten that. Move on. Don't even think about it. I kind of hope that's not the case, because I want to see that family dynamic, but I'm putting on my, Brandon Sanderson hat here and trying to guess what he's going to do, and I think that's what he's going to do.
Do I need to remind you that he's writing Oathbringer? Does that change anything? My glory and my shame.
I dedicate this book to my kids, Adolin and Renarin, whose mother unfortunately passed.
I think it's going to take him a while to write that book. I think it's going to be a while before that comes up. Someday, yes. Someday it'll be, hey, son, I need to tell you about this. Oh, by the way, here's a book I wrote a few years ago about this. But nah, I'm sticking to it's not going to come up. I'm going to regret this. You can play this soundbite later, but
I might.
I think if it was any of our other characters, I would be fully on it could just not come up. But I think if any of our characters are going to share that, it'd be Dalinar.
All right. Favorite quotes. Let's try to not spend too much time on our favorite quotes. So I will go first. I've got them right here. I have 2 favorite quotes. Actually, I have like 17 favorite quotes, let's be honest. But I limited myself to 2. And they are poetically the beginning of the in-world Way of Kings, written by Noadon. Shout out to our podcast title. And the beginning of the in-world Oathbringer, written by Dalinar at the very end of the book. So when we find out the in-world Way of Kings, this is Yasna reading aloud, like down the hallway at Gavilar's funeral. And Yasna is speaking this aloud. This is the first page of the in-world Way of Kings. The question, she replied, is not whether you will love, hurt, dream, and die. It is what you will love, why you will hurt, when you will dream, and how you will die. This is your choice. You cannot pick the destination, only the path. I really enjoy that quote, but I enjoy more the context of how we receive that quote, of Yasna reading aloud and Dalinar overhearing, and then they read the whole book together. And then my second one is at the very end of the book. The most important words a man can say are, I will do better. These are not the most important words any man can say. I am a man, and they are what I needed to say. That quote's a lot longer, but I'm not going to read the whole thing. I did that last week.
I'll jump into my quotes then. Trevor, you stole some really good ones. If you hadn't already put this on the outline, I would have. But that gives me an opportunity to dig for some other good ones, because there were quite a few really good throw pillow quotes, I would call them. Something you can embroider on a throw pillow and put it on your couch. The first one I pulled up, I feel like summarizes at least the first half of Dalinar's journey in this pretty well. And I'd be willing to guess is a fairly famous one from this book. And it's this. Sometimes a hypocrite is nothing more than a man who is in the process of changing. And yeah, how that ties into the whole, who is Dalinar? Is he the Dalinar that we know in the present day? Is he the Dalinar of the olden days? That whole struggle was a really cool mental exercise to kind of go through. The next one I want to read is actually from much earlier in the book, and it didn't really have the weight that it has now that we've read the whole book. And I just kind of stumbled across it. I was going back to my notes, and I was like, wow, that's really important saying here. And it's actually in the discussion where Dalinar and Kaladin are talking about the part of the kingdom, the land that Kaladin is being granted. Now that he's a light eyes of a certain stature, he's supposed to have land. Dalinar's like, hey, we found you a great little fiefdom over here. You can go be the duke of this land. And Kaladin basically responds with like, "Sir, I don't want that burden. I don't want to do that. That sounds like a lot of work." And Dalinar responds with this: "If you'd wanted a life of burdens, you shouldn't have said the oaths." And like the more you think about that one, the more it's like, oh man, that's a good one. And then the last one, I'm not even going to say anything about it. It's stand on its own. It's cherry picked right out of a bit of a, I think it's an interlude actually, but it stand on its own. It's a fun little quote that I actually really love. Probably maybe my favorite from the whole book. "One can believe in a story without believing it happened."
I believe that's from our recent interlude.
It is.
It is. So I had one quote from our book, which really stood out to me and what I wanted to bring to the table. In chapter 82, this is when Wit and Shallan are talking, and he says, "You're not a monster, Shallan," Wit whispered. "Oh, child, the world is monstrous at times, and there are those who would have you believe that you are terrible by association. I am. No, for ye see, it flows the other direction. You are not worse for your association with the world, but it is better for its association with you." This was that moment that I had been wanting Shallan to have for a while. I make fun of Shallan a lot on this podcast, but I mean, she's a great character. I really appreciate Shallan, and I was very much looking forward to this kind of development and moment, or that form of breakthrough. So, yeah, that was the biggest quote I chose. Honorable mention to Wit saying, "You look like you need the opportunity to get me something to eat."
That's also a good one.
Yeah. Also, this is my first time getting to open the physical book. Can y'all believe it? I've got the actual book here in my hand, and it took me a while to find quotes, but
not a true Alethi man knows how to read.
Yeah. Exactly.
All right. Now, Elliot, you said at the beginning of this episode that you felt like you had more answers than questions. And that is quite the statement. But I would like to go into this next segment and revisit our the Wave Kings wrap up episode, the same thing we're doing here. And you just had a list. We made a video about it, just like a 4-minute, like quick. I'm reading everything that I might have a question about, and I'm going to read that same list, and I want you guys to give me a one-word response. That if I were to ask you what this word meant, if you could accurately define it, and if you're satisfied with what you know of it at this point. Okay?
I'm excited. I'm excited for this.
All right. Dawn Singers.
Sort of.
Yeah, those singers.
Taravangian.
Yeah.
Understood.
Ghostbloods.
I don't know
Maybe.
I don't know the scale yet. I know who they are.
Shallan's family.
Yeah.
Got them figured out, yeah.
Symbol heads.
Figured
yes.
out.
Old magic.
We both turned our heads.
Maybe.
Was that in relation to the mysterious woman interlude?
This
Who's,
is in
a thief?
relation to the Night Watcher.
Okay.
Go to the Night Watcher and dabble in the old magic.
Okay.
So mostly, I would say.
We have hints. Yeah, we have a guesses.
Everstorm.
Yeah. Mostly.
Odium.
Old
I've
news.
got them figured out.
Yeah. Adonalsium.
That one I still have a few questions.
I think I kind of get it. I think of, I don't know how much I should elaborate, but
The origin.
I think I get it. No clue.
Origin is like top of my want to know about it for no real actual reason. Like I'm intrigued about what the heck the origin is. It probably doesn't matter.
Parshendi no Dalinar?
Been there, done that. We got that one. We're good. It's all good.
Yes, sort of. Yeah. The Dalinar part still confused me a little bit.
It was explained. They saw him at the feast. They knew who he was. That was all explained. Yeah. Fabrials?
It's just it's fantasy engineering.
We've come a long way from when I first, asked that question, but there's still some questions.
We know like that you have to be a smart engineer person, know a lot about them, fancy pants to use them or to make them, but we don't understand the full-on mechanics, which I think is okay.
The Sunmaker.
I can't even remember if we're supposed to know anything about this one anymore.
That's like the original owner of Oathbringer, right? That's like guy who conquered a lot of people and places.
Correct. That's the Alethi tyrant guy who swept across Roshar with Oathbringer.
Yeah.
Dalinar's wife.
That is a mystery we solved.
Midnight Essence.
We know more, but maybe not all.
You know they are from the Unmade. What's their face? Who was hiding in Urithiru?
Yeah.
Right.
Ray Shapir. Is it?
I think so.
Ray Shapir.
Yep.
Yeah. The one. Yeah.
The Stormfather.
Yeah. He's a like junior god. God Junior.
We're buddies with him now.
God Junior. Yeah.
The Scouring of Aemia.
Ooh.
Nope. No clue.
Nope.
Tef's past.
No.
Yeah, kind of. A little bit.
Got a glimpse.
Moash's past.
Nope. That's a big one. I want to know now.
We got the story.
Yeah, within the you actually do know this one. Within the context, when this was written, Moash was like, "Man, I hate the king," and everyone's like, "Why though?" And that whole Words of Radiance arc was the answer to that question.
Okay.
Old Bloods.
This is an offhand mention that has never come up again. I'm intrigued.
I didn't remember this at all.
Rissyn.
Yeah.
We definitely know more, and I think we're about to find out even more when we go into our next novella.
My one word for Rissyn is girl boss.
Aeamians.
Hardly anything.
It seems unimportant in the grand scheme.
Curse of Kind.
That ties in with the Aeamians, right? That's in reference to Axes. Yeah, we need to know a lot more about that.
The 10 Essences.
We've kind of learned that they tie into, specific things. They're related to the gemstones, potentially even the heralds, the orders.
The 10 Fools.
Not much.
Is that maybe a offhand, like, common tongue reference of our Unmade somehow?
See, if it was 9, I'd be all over that. But it's 10. And they're like usually referenced as like an inverse of the heralds. But there's 10 and there's 9 Unmade. So it doesn't make sense.
The Envisagers.
We learned a little bit about these for Tef's past, right? Mm-hmm. Definitely some unknown there, but we at least got told who they were.
Urithiru.
Ah, we've been there.
It's a town.
Noadon?
Nice guy. Nice man.
We've seen a lot more of him. I still feel like there's more to learn there, though.
Can we pause on this for a second?
No.
You have as much context as I did when I named the podcast. Do you understand why I named the podcast? Or has that been satisfied in your heads?
Oh yeah, I'm tracking.
Yes, because initially we are kind of following the footsteps, or trying to figure out the footsteps of Noadon, and we see way less, if anything, from Noadon now. But I feel like Dalinar has followed in his footsteps, and we're kind of following Dalinar. So
Correct.
that's how I've interpreted that.
And the way that the in-world way of kings has been so kind of central throughout, and Noadon being the source of that, like that is kind of the core essence of what we are trying to discover and walk the path of. So yeah, we're totally following Noadon so far.
Yep. There's two parts where for the first two books you're trying to find Urithiru, and he literally walks from Abamabar to Urithiru, which actually Ranks brought up the point of, is that just like a generic term of like, I walked from A to Z, I walked from Abamabar to Urithiru, like I walked the whole world is basically what he's saying. You know what you understand what he's trying to get to?
Is it literal, or is it just like an expression?
Right.
Yeah.
I had never thought about that before, but until he brought that up. World Singers.
Yes and no.
Red eyes and white eyes.
I was really keyed into this when we read Way of Kings. There was emphasis on, I don't even remember the specifics, but certain characters having red eyes, and then a few different characters had specifically white eyes. I'm ready to, we haven't really learned anything super specific about that. I'm kind of ready to write that off as eye color is really important in this world, which we didn't fully understand at that time. Maybe there's more to it.
Amaram.
Oh yeah, that guy.
He's gone.
He's dead.
He's toast.
The Mistress.
Ah. She was really mysterious when we first saw her in her interlude in Way of Kings.
Mm-hmm.
But now I think we know who she is now.
You do. That is Shalash, who's going around Roshar destroying all depictions of herself.
That's true.
The Prime Akasix.
Not the faintest idea.
You know who this is, you just forgot.
We know that primes have to do with the ruling, entities of the Azir type worlds. And so I think there's a few different primes that are mentioned, but I think we have the gist of what these people are.
This is the guy who Teravangian has killed by Zeth before Yanagon is brought up to be the prime. It's just the leader of the Azish.
He's just some king guy.
Dawn Cities.
Somewhat.
This is
where the Dawn Shards are from.
This is in relation to Capsule. Do you remember him? He had his little sand pot, and if you played a note on it, it would vibrate into the shape of Kholinar or Thalen City or whatever.
Nice.
Hoyd.
Are we ever going to get enough answers about that guy?
We got him. We got him figured out. I think we figured out everything we needed.
I just used Hoyd ? As the thumbnail for that video because I thought that was so funny. Just Hoyd as a question. The Ideals.
I remember how nebulous that was when the concept was first, posed to us, but I think we have a fairly good understanding of at least what the structure of ideals are, the different ideals.
We understand the purpose.
Long Shadow. One word. Long Shadow.
This is another mentioned once and never again, but was capitalized, so I know it's important.
Isn't it just whenever you go into when you go into Shadesmar or close to Shadesmar, your shadow turns around,
Correct.
In front of you or whatever.
This is a name.
But
yeah, this was different.
I don't know.
Dawn Chant.
It's Kind
Little
of,
bit.
sort of.
Tara.
Yes, finally.
Was that Kaladin's high school crush or
Yes.
child?
Yes.
Okay.
That one bugged me for a
Gotcha.
long time.
Bright Collar. Also a name. Bright Collar, one word.
Another throwaway mention.
Life Brother.
Yet again.
And Dawn Shards.
Going back to our little names, my guess is like some kind of local podunk reference to different heralds or something. It's just like a nickname for them or something, but who knows? Dawn Shards we have figured out.
Yep.
So that's good.
Paul's got them figured out. I need to read Dawn Shard again to remember what they
I
are.
don't fully know what connects them, but we know what they are, right? Our Dark Sphere, Zeth's Sword, Nightblood, our King's Drop. Anything that doesn't fit into our narrative and we don't quite understand that is like an item or weapon. Azure's Sword. Yeah. So those are just a few of our Dawn Shards, which we'll find out more of them.
All right. I've done enough talking. Time for you guys. That was all of our questions coming out of the Wave Kings. I don't know, 60% answered or so?
Yeah, pretty good.
70%?
Yeah, 50-ish.
Do you want the new questions?
I do. From this point forward, I want questions and then I want predictions. What are we going to learn about? What do we not know about? And how is that going to go?
So I have another fairly moderately long list of minor questions that I just have as one words to add to our list. But some of the bigger questions, I definitely have some of those. Some of the major questions that aren't quite as major are things like Urithiru. Are they going to figure out how to turn the place on? Like we get all these references to the place is like unpowered, or they got to figure out how to activate it, or is it like alive? There's some weird references to that. Like, are they going to figure that out? That's a big unanswered question.
Just pause real quick right there. Where's the line between sci-fi and fantasy?
Wherever it is, we are flirting with, if not crossed it at this point.
Because the Wave Kings is a fantasy book, right? I mean, you've got a little bit of magic, but it's just a fantasy world. You're dropped in. If they figure out how to light up a glowing tower with Stormlight electricity and have elevators and all sorts, at what point are we into science fiction, right? Like,
it's coming fast. And the day that transition started for me was Oathgates. As soon as we had Oathgates, I was like, whoa, we are branching out into the sci-fi world. So yeah, if they get like a fully autonomous city going, yeah, we're all the way there. Another big question out there is, this might be the biggest, honestly. Renarin. Renarin seems to be like the key piece at this point on the chessboard. He is maybe the most important character going forward. Like Dalinar's had his moment, right? He saved the day, super incredible. He vanquished the thrill. But now we know that Renarin is like the missing piece, the link between all the different sides here. So how is that going to play out? My prediction, my guess, I think we might see this story take a darker turn. I think that we just saw a pretty epic. We were up against unvanquishable evil, and we had our Deus Ex Machina moment where we saved the day with a eucatastrophe, to use a Tolkienism
Tolkien term, yes.
Yes. And I think to maybe kind of reflect that, to be a pivot away from that, I think our next story might be a little darker. And I think Renarin could be at the center of that. That I don't know if that's quite a prediction, but you can throw that in the prediction bucket.
There was a there's a phrase you used there for a second of Dalinar's had his moment. This was my big prediction at the end of Oathbringer going into Rhythm of War. I thought Dalinar was going to die. I thought he had his time. I thought he had his arc. I thought he was going to die. Now, whether that actually happens, we can read and find out. But when I was in your shoes right now, that was my, that was everybody's big prediction, basically. Dalinar's going to die.
Paul, I got to know what you think about Renarin.
Yes, so I wanted to bring this up, and on the topic of dying, I also am predicting in our next book that we're going to have a major death. But Dalinar actually didn't come to mind. I wasn't thinking of which character has like kind of finished their time on the show, I didn't know fully who to predict, but I think if we have a death, it's going to be like one that really hurts. So what came to my mind was Kaladin. I could see him very well. Fourth ideal, ending up laying his life down for his friends, and being a very emotional moment there. I have Renarin listed as a potential. There's a lot of I really hope to see Renarin as more of a centerpiece. I really do, because I'm very intrigued. But I could see there just being a lot of emotional drama with Renarin dying. There's several. I think we'll see a major death. I don't know if I can accurately predict who.
I think if we do see a major character death, the one that I think would hurt the most would be Adolin. I think a lot of those other characters, we could lose them, and it would be emotional. It would be impactful, like a Dalinar, but you would feel like, he had his moment, he championed it, and then, he sacrificed himself. Like that would be you'd feel complete after that. But I feel like Adolin's story is just beginning. I feel like Adolin, he's had some struggles, he's had some great moments, but I feel like he's just like at the launching point still. So if we were to lose Renarin, that would be a painful one. Or not Renarin, Adolin.
I could see that. I am actually in the boat that both of those characters, actually, Adolin and Renarin, would probably be near the top of my list of most impactful. I could see this both ways. My initial thought was if Adolin died, I could see a very driven storyline from Renarin to try and fill those shoes.
Yeah.
And in another way, I could see that Adolin potentially becoming a Knights Radiant through the grievance of his younger brother. And there's lots of ways you could twist that, which we're really like, I'm getting emotional right now, and this is off of a hypothetical guess of what might happen, which odds are won't happen how I'm guessing, but man, but I could see that being very emotional, and seeing like a big stand-up charge from either of these characters we've seen the passion with Kaladin driven through Tien. I think we would see that on a more personal level if we had that as a dynamic between Adolin and Renarin.
Any big questions into theories or just questions?
Another big one on my mind is Shah Anat. Can we trust Shah Anat? It sounds like Shah Anat might be willing to defect, to leave Odium and maybe help our heroes. Shah Anat may have already done so. It seems like she has. And so, yeah, I'm not sure.
I would like to find out more about our perpendicularities.
Oh, yeah.
They're very important, but
when I was in your shoes, I was completely baffled by the perpendicularity. Like, what just happened with Dalinar? He claps his hand together in the spiritual realm, floods with Stormlight, and the cognitive realm pulls everybody who's physically there into, I was so confused. I was like, what?
You were confused, Trevor? Wow, like it
I'm
just
sorry.
made perfect sense to me. I can't believe, man.
I'm wondering who's going to get to their fourth ideal first. We've been told specifically that fourth ideal, you get your shard plate. And it seems like no one's gotten there, except for some rather interesting hints that Trevor has dropped recently. So I guess the big question is who's going to get there first, or has someone already gotten there? I'm not sure.
I think this is too early for me to say. This is my last thing. And that, honestly, I'm way more excited for fourth ideals to be passed because I'm Shardplate. We understand it's been at least a character in our story for a long time, right? All the initial shard plates and blades, but I would like to understand the significance of what's beyond that. With fifth ideals, because I have no clue. Not this. I don't have the slightest guess or clue. You become the law for the Skybreakers. That's as much as I know.
Right.
And I'm very invested, so I'm excited for our fourth ideals so that we can start to think about fifth ideals.
I don't think we've mentioned it yet, but Zeth, who's awesome by Paul's standards, has been granted access to the Surge of Division. I think we've kind of just brushed over that, but
Isn't that awesome?
Nail-
That's so awesome.
Nail
Yikes.
said you can now do Division. I'll come back and teach you it, but it's now yours. Bye bye. And that's how he leaves it. He's like, be careful.
Okay, Trevor, I have a test for you. Seth can do division. Can you do long division?
If I was in 6th grade, maybe, but
I thought about that the other day and I was like, wow, that's been a long time since I've done long division. Anyways, that's not important.
Yeah, as if Zeth wasn't powerful enough. Now the dude is crazy deadly, has Nightblood, the most destructive thing I think we've seen yet, and can now wield Division. Wow. We have the ever-present Dark Sphere, question mark.
Which we
On
got
the,
a second dimension
outline.
of.
I was going to say,
We got our second dimension.
we've already said this and laughed about it, but I just want to revisit the fact that Eliot was right with Paul, carrying it through this whole time, and right before part 5 of Oathbringer, he's like, "You know what, man? I don't think we're gonna learn about the Dark Sphere." He gave up
the race
at the finish line.
Oh, it's not the finish line. That was just the first water station of this marathon.
True.
Of nary a single mention, maybe like one, for 3 whole books. And I finally decide that it was a red herring. And the next page, oh, that unmade you have encased in there? I remember. Gavilar had something like that. What? So yeah, it's back on top of the list.
I fully support Elliot. I think he should continue to deny that the Dark Sphere is important, and then hopefully we'll get to learn about it. So,
Any other big questions, or are you ready for the list of minor?
Paul, do you have any before we go?
cool book.
Sounds good. Go.
Okay. Talk about the major ones, but of course, it's Brandon Sanderson, so there's a whole host of other random, seemingly not important things that I now have questions about, and they are Shin Honor Blades, Tezim, Aona, Sky, Cultivation's Perpendicularity, Yasna's Past, Azure, Azure's Blade, The Sibling. I could not come up with a single word or something for this, but we've come across a metal that appears to have magic properties. They were using it to hide the
span reed,
and the soul casting within Kolinar. So anyway, super powerful metal stuff. Ether, the Black Fisher, the Spawning Mother, the Faceless, Shashara, The Stone of 10 Dawns, The Painting, Ba'ado Mishram, Chemo Arish, I'm butchering all these names, I'm sorry. The Windrunner's Fourth Ideal, Zeta the Voiced, Di Gonarthis, Braze, Midius, Bata Elin, Fortune, and Raise.
Let me just say, next week, we are going into Arcanum Unbounded, and we will be reading excerpts out of that for the next month. And we will be answering some of those questions you just had next week. And not just one or two. We're answering several next week with my Cosmere 101 episode that I will be presenting.
Well, that's great, because I think I recognized a quarter of the things he just named, so.
All right. Are there any closing thoughts on Oathbringer by Brandon Sanderson before we close it and move on to some wider Cosmere stories before Dawnchard and Rhythm of War?
Once again, cool book.
Once again, for me, what a journey. We've said this, we're kind of beating that metaphor to death now, but we paid for, we did the work. We've gone through the slog, the slow journey, and the payoff was so worth it. And not just the payoff of this book, the payoff of the 3 books that we've read so far. All of the moments building up to this epic, frantic scene at the end of Oathbringer is pretty incredible. Pretty incredible.
I 100% agree. I've said,
Eliot, when Eliot, whenever we start our next book, next Stormlight book, Rhythm of War, we'll be knowing we're past that halfway mark. Isn't that fun? That's pretty neat.
Past halfway, we'll be further than Trevor was when we started this.
We will.
Yeah.
True.
I can't wait to the part where we can go back and watch the episode they made like 2 years ago about Rhythm of War.
I've said this a couple times, but I will say it again. Next week, we will be doing Ars Arcanum. The reading for that is going to be the title excerpts from each system and the chapter 1 of White Sand that's in Arcanum Unbounded. The week after that, we will be going into Emperor's Soul, which is also in Arcanum Unbounded. And then after that, we will be doing the Sixth of Dusk and Shadows for Silence in the Forests of Hell. So, we can reconvene next week. Thank you for joining me for Oathbringer. Paul and Eliot.
See you later.
You're welcome.